The morning sun had barely cleared the red rocks of the eastern ridge, casting a soft golden hue over the dust-brushed hills of Red Rock Valley. The air was still and dry, thick with the scent of creosote and mesquite. Ella Branson stood at the window of her log cabin, nursing a cup of black coffee that had long since gone lukewarm. Her eyes scanned the horizon like they always did, not out of habit, but instinct. After 30 years of working with wild animals, Ella had learned that the desert never stayed quiet for long. Tucker, her old Australian shepherd, sat at her feet, ears pricked, tail twitching. The dog was restless. Ella noticed it right away. "What is it, boy?" she murmured, setting her mug down. Tucker stood, a low growl in his throat, and padded to the screen door, eyes locked on the open desert beyond the horse pastures. Ella followed his gaze, squinting into the distance. At first, she thought it was just heat shimmer, the usual illusion that danced over the valley floor when the sun started rising. But then, through the waves of heat, a shape began to materialize. A horse, a lone Mustang. Ella stepped outside and grabbed the binoculars that hung from a rusty nail beside the door. She raised them slowly, heart quickening. The horse was a stallion. Big, dark, and dust-covered, his powerful frame moving with deliberate, unbroken rhythm. But something was off. Something about the way he carried himself. His back arched in a way that made her stomach twist. And then she saw it. "Oh my God," she whispered. There, slumped over the stallion's back, lay a foal. Tucker barked, sharp and urgent. Ella no do do. She threw on her canvas jacket, grabbed her keys, and sprinted toward the ATV parked beside the barn. The engine growled to life, and she tore across the flatland, kicking up a trail of fine red dust behind her. Her heart pounded louder than the rattling engine. As she drew closer, the stallion didn't bolt. He simply stood there, about 10 yards beyond the fence line, a massive silhouette against the backdrop of sun-scorched earth and wide-open sky. His coat was a deep, earthen brown, streaked with sweat and dirt, his black mane tangled and windblown. His sides heaved with fatigue. Ella killed the engine and stepped off slowly, hands open, voice calm. "Easy now, I'm not gonna hurt you." The stallion didn't move. His eyes, dark and intelligent, locked onto hers. Not wild in the usual way, but clear, intense, almost pleading. Ella edged forward. Her gaze dropped to the small body draped across the stallion's back. It was a foal, all right, no more than a few days old. Its coat was a patchwork of white and chestnut, too clean-lined to be a Mustang. It was domestic, and it wasn't moving. "Jesus," she breathed. Tucker whined at her side, keeping his distance. Ella inched closer, her boots crunching on gravel. "You carried him here," she said, barely believing the words herself. "Didn't you?" The stallion blinked slowly, then shifted his weight just enough to lower his back a little, almost like an offering. Ella stopped just outside arm's reach. The foal's sides moved faintly, shallow breaths, but they were there, still alive. "I need to help him," she said gently, not knowing if the stallion could understand, but speaking to him like he could. "You've done more than anyone could have expected. Let me take it from here." With each careful step, she watched the stallion for signs of panic, the twitch of a flank, the tightening of his jaw, but he remained steady. Only his nostrils flared as she came close enough to lay her hand on the foal's flank. It was like touching sun-warmed velvet. Soft, fragile, barely alive. Ella's fingers trembled as she examined the foal's limbs. Scratches, bruises, dehydration. But no broken bones. He was emaciated, sunken-eyed, his small frame showing signs of days without proper nourishment. And yet, the way he was positioned, it hadn't happened by accident. This wasn't a fluke. The stallion had carried him here, deliberately and with care. She looked up at the stallion again, awe softening her features. "You're not just some wild horse, are you?" For a long moment, they stood in silence, two creatures on either side of an unspoken understanding. Then, with surprising gentleness, the stallion shifted again, lowering his body just enough for Ella to ease the foal from his back. The little horse let out a soft, broken sound. Not a whinny, not a cry, more like a sigh. Ella cradled the foal in her arms. He was so light, too light. "I've got you," she whispered. Tucker barked once, and Ella turned toward the sanctuary's main barn. She started walking, slowly at first, then quicker, heart pounding as the weight of what she was holding sank in. But behind her the stallion followed, not close, not aggressively, just watching, tracking their movement like a sentinel. Ella stopped, half expecting him to bolt now that his mission was complete, but he stood at a distance, ears pricked, legs trembling with exhaustion, and didn't move any farther. "You're waiting," Ella murmured, stunned. She reached the barn and laid the foal, now clearly male, onto a bed of clean hay in the emergency stall. She grabbed a blanket, a bucket of water, and the emergency foal formula she always kept on hand, just in case. She had never imagined she'd be using it like this. The foal's lips barely responded to the bottle's nipple, but he sucked weakly. That was enough. A beginning. Ella turned and looked back out the open barn doors. The stallion still stood there, unmoving, unyielding, silent. The red dust of the desert swirled gently around his legs as the wind picked up. His mane rippled, catching the last light of morning. He looked not like a wild animal, but like a guardian watching over something sacred. Ella's voice caught in her throat. She stepped back outside and took a few careful steps toward him. "What happened out there, boy?" she whispered. "Where did you find him? And how did you know to bring him here?" The stallion blinked slowly, chest rising and falling with weariness. Her fingers trembled as she reached out a hand again, not to touch this time, but simply to acknowledge. "You saved him," she said, her voice cracking. The stallion didn't move. He didn't need to. The truth was already written in every exhausted breath, every patient step that had led him here. And Ella knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. The foal didn't move much through the night. Ella sat beside the emergency stall, her eyes heavy but stubbornly open, watching the rise and fall of the little paint colt's ribs. Every few hours she fed him small amounts of formula, wiped down his fragile body with warm cloths, and whispered encouragement in the dim light of the barn. She named him Riley. It came to her softly, as if the name had always belonged to him. Outside, the wind picked up. A desert cold had crept in with the setting sun, and though Ella had shut the barn doors, she left one open just wide enough. The stallion, still camped out by the paddock, hadn't budged since the rescue. His silhouette was etched in the shadows beyond the barn light, head high, posture alert, as though guarding Riley through the long night. By dawn, Ella could no longer ignore the obvious. She needed help. The colt was still alive, but he was dangerously weak. She reached for her phone and dialed the one person she trusted more than anyone with emergencies like this. Dr. Miles Carrington picked up on the second ring. His voice was groggy but familiar. "Ella, you okay?" "No," she said quietly. "I need you here, fast." 20 minutes later, a dusty green pickup truck bounced down the long drive to Silver Rock Sanctuary. Tucker ran out barking, then circled the vehicle in excited loops. Ella waved from the barn, exhausted but grateful. Dr. Carrington climbed out, still wearing his old military-style jacket and baseball cap, medical bag in hand. "Tell me what I'm walking into," he said. "It's not just a foal," Ella told him as they walked. "It's a story I don't think you're going to believe." Inside the barn, Miles knelt by the stall and examined Riley. His trained hands moved quickly, checking heart rate, hydration levels, reflexes. His brows furrowed. "This colt's maybe 4 days old," he murmured. "He's dehydrated, starving. But it's his body condition. Look here, these pressure points on his ribs and here under his chest. These marks aren't from lying down, they're from being carried." Ella asentio. "That's what I've been trying to tell you. Look outside." Miles turned toward the open door. The stallion still stood where she'd said he would. Silent, still, unblinking. "You're kidding me," Miles muttered. "I'm not. He carried Riley here, on his back, across the desert. Miles, he's wild." Miles stepped out slowly, eyes scanning the horse. A wild stallion carried a domestic foal. That's impossible. Wild horses don't just do that. Ella cruzó sus brazos, cansada y todavía tratando de envolver su propia cabeza alrededor de eso. "And yet, here we are." They stood quietly for a moment, watching the stallion. His flanks rose and fell steadily, though the strain of the journey clung to every muscle in his body. Dust clung to his legs and belly. Old scars crisscrossed his hide. Signs of past fights, perhaps with other stallions. But now, there was something different in him. Not aggression, not dominance, purpose. Miles rubbed the back of his neck. "You said he didn't bolt?" "Number." He let me take Riley off his back, watched me carry him into the barn, then parked himself right there and hasn't moved an inch. "That's not wild behavior?" "No," Ella said. "It's something else entirely." Back inside, Miles continued treating the foal. He administered fluid slowly and monitored Riley's vitals. The colt stirred more now, weak but responsive. He sucked at the bottle with slightly more strength, his ears twitching at the sound of Tucker's bark. Ella se apoyó en un post, brazos plegados. "I've been thinking about it all night, trying to figure out where Riley came from. He's too clean-blooded to be wild. He's domestic, probably part of a herd east of here. Maybe one of those paint stock operations past Mesa Ridge. That's at least 40 miles away," Miles said. "Exactly." Miles glanced out toward the stallion again, his tone shifting. "You think he scouted this place?" Ella hesitated. "I do. I've seen him before, not up close, but from a distance. A couple weeks ago. He was watching the ranch from the ridge." Miles frowned. "That means he didn't just stumble onto Riley, he found him, then decided where to bring him, chose to carry him, and picked you." Ella met his eyes. "You think that's possible?" Miles didn't answer right away. He crouched down beside the foal again, gently brushing dirt from Riley's small face. "I've seen horses do incredible things. But this?" He shook his head in disbelief. "You said he hasn't left?" Miles asked. "Number, and I don't think he's going to." Hours passed. Riley began to stir more, his breaths deeper. His eyes opened for longer periods, and he even lifted his head briefly when Ella knelt beside him. His trust was startling, as though he had already decided she was safe. Meanwhile, the stallion finally moved, but only to reposition himself closer to the barn's open door. He didn't come inside, just stood, half-shadowed by the doorframe, watching. "That horse is invested," Miles said, watching from the stall with Ella. "He's not just curious, he's waiting." Ella felt the weight of it, the miracle, the impossibility, the responsibility. "I've never seen anything like this. Have you?" "No," Miles said softly, And I don't think we're just dealing with animal instinct here. That stallion made a decision. By late afternoon, Riley managed to stand, wobbly and weak, but upright. Ella had tears in her eyes watching him take his first trembling steps. She glanced toward the doorway. The stallion took one small step forward. Riley let out the smallest nicker, barely audible. The stallion answered with a deep, low sound, like a rumble from the earth itself. Ella looked to Miles. "Did you hear that?" "I heard it," he whispered, "and so did he." As the sun dipped low, casting long gold beams across the stable floor, Ella moved to close the barn for the night. She turned back one last time, gazing at the stallion who still waited just outside. "You didn't just survive the desert," she said under her breath. "You crossed it with hope in your heart." The stallion's ears twitched. His eyes glinted in the fading light. Then, from deep in his chest, came a sound Ella had never heard from a wild horse. A long, low nicker, steady and deliberate. It was not fear. It was not warning. It was trust. And it shook her to her core. By the third morning, the foal was standing on his own. Still shaky, still thin, ribs visible beneath his soft coat, but standing. Ella stood just outside the stall with a thermos of hot coffee clutched between her hands, watching Riley wobble around the straw bedding like a newborn deer finding its legs. He'd already started responding to his name, his ears flicking toward her voice, his eyes tracking her when she moved. But even more remarkable than the colt's progress was the stallion. He had not left. 3 nights. 3 desert-cold moonlit nights spent sleeping just beyond the barn, not pacing, not grazing, not restless, just waiting. Ella had never seen anything like it. On the second night, she'd placed a bucket of water and some hay out near the paddock, assuming he'd eventually eat if he was hungry enough. She'd watched from the shadows as he slowly approached, sniffed, then drank, cautiously, respectfully, as if understanding the offer. But it wasn't until the early hours of the third morning that she saw something that shifted everything. Coyotes. A small pack slinking through the scrub, silent and low. Ella spotted them from the loft window, their eyes glowing in the moonlight. She was reaching for her rifle when she heard it. A roar, not quite a neigh, not quite a scream. Deep, wild, primal. The stallion. He charged the fence line like a thunderclap. Hooves tearing through dry soil, body colliding with the gate with enough force to rattle the hinges. The coyotes scattered, tails tucked. Ella ran to the barn just in time to see the stallion standing guard outside Riley's stall, chest heaving, ears pinned forward. He didn't stop snorting until the last of the coyotes vanished into the darkness. The next morning, she named him. "Guardian," she said, walking toward him with a fresh bucket of water and a quiet voice. "That's who you are. That's what you've become." He didn't move away. From that day forward, Guardian became part of the routine. Morning and evening visits to Riley's stall, always watching, always alert. He never tried to enter, never pushed boundaries. But his presence was as steady as the rising sun, and Riley began to change. He grew stronger, faster than Ella or Miles expected. His steps steadied, his head lifted higher. He whinnied when Ella walked in, and something more complex, something soft and almost reverent, when Guardian appeared at the door. By the end of the week, Ella called in a favor from an old colleague, someone who'd once studied elephant bonding behavior in Kenya and had since become a rising name in interspecies communication. Her name was Maya Reyes, and when she stepped out of the white SUV onto the red dust of the sanctuary road, Ella could see she still carried the same fierce spark behind her eyes. "You said I wouldn't believe it," Maya said, setting down her bag. You undersold it." Inside the barn, she watched quietly for an hour. Riley paced, playful and bright-eyed, still skittish with new people, but curious. Outside, Guardian stood as usual, his gaze flicking between the barn door and the ridge. "He's not pacing like a trapped animal," Maya noted, jotting into her notepad. "He's calculating, regulating his own energy." Ella asintió. "He's not restless, he's waiting." Later that afternoon, they tried something new. Ella abrió las grandes puertas laterales del granero y dejó que Riley saliera al exterior y entrara en el corral redondo. The colt moved cautiously at first, ears twitching. Then he saw Guardian. Guardian let out a low nicker. Not a call, a signal. And Riley responded. He walked toward him, nose high, tail flicking. Not afraid, not hesitant, just drawn. "That's not coincidence," Maya whispered. The two horses touched noses over the pen's wooden rail, Guardian lowering his head slightly, Riley stretching his neck to meet him. Then the colt did something Ella had never seen. He leaned into Guardian's neck, pressing gently, as if to rest. Guardian stayed still. "Ella," Maya said quietly, "he's mimicking imprinting behaviors." "You think it's parental?" "I think," Maya said, still watching, "we're witnessing a cross-species adoption, and not out of instinct, out of choice." For the next 2 days, Maya recorded everything. Guardian's posture, Riley's responses, vocal cues. What started as simple observation turned into something else entirely when she realized Guardian wasn't just watching, he was teaching. When Riley startled at a sudden sound, a slamming barn door, Guardian would nicker low and rhythmic, and Riley would calm almost instantly. When Ella tossed a blanket over a fence post and Riley flinched, Guardian stepped forward, gently nudged the post, then looked at the colt. Riley came forward, sniffed, and settled. "This is learned behavior," Maya said. "He's not just comforting, he's educating." They watched this happen again and again. A soft, deliberate vocal signal from Guardian, followed by Riley's calm compliance. It was unmistakable. "He has vocal identifiers," Maya said, astonished. "Specific cues Riley recognizes. This is communication, and not just instinctual. It's personalized. He's adapted his sounds for one specific foal." Ella leaned on the stall rail, emotion swelling in her throat. "He chose to be his father." Exactly. That evening, as the sun dipped low and turned the red rocks to gold, Ella stood outside the barn watching Riley in the pen. He moved with surprising grace for such a young colt. Light on his feet, confident, alert. Then a moment of panic. A hawk swooped low overhead, casting a shadow across the pen. Riley, spooked, bolted toward the far end, hooves thundering against the packed dirt. But Guardian was already moving. He intercepted Riley's path with effortless timing, circling wide, then cutting in with just enough pressure to steer the colt back toward the safe side of the pen. No panic, no force, just protection. When Riley settled, Guardian stopped nearby, turned his head slowly, and let out a quiet, pulsing nicker, low and reassuring. Riley lowered his head, relaxed, then walked toward him again. Maya didn't write anything down. She just whispered, "That wasn't training. That was parenting. Ella se tragó con fuerza." "I think," she said, "that horse would die for him." Maya didn't respond, because they both knew the truth. He already had nearly done just that, and he would again if he had to. The day the government showed up, the sky over Red Rock Valley was thick with dust and wind. A storm was brewing, and not just in the sky. Ella stood at the barn entrance, arms crossed, lips pressed tight. Her eyes followed the white SUV as it rolled up the drive, kicking up a cloud of desert grit. It came to a stop beside the paddock, just as Riley and Guardian trotted side by side along the far fence, the colt playful and agile, the stallion matching his pace with measured calm. The door opened, and out stepped a man in a crisp button-down shirt and aviator sunglasses. He held a folder under one arm and walked like someone who didn't have time for questions. "Ella Branson?" he called. She nodded. "Sam Dwyer, Bureau of Land Management." Ella didn't shake his hand. "I'm here about the stallion," he said, nodding toward Guardian. "I figured." Dwyer looked past her, watching the two horses with vague curiosity. "We've had satellite tags reporting an unaccounted wild Mustang in close proximity to human infrastructure. That's him." "You mean the horse who carried a newborn foal across the desert and saved his life?" Ella shot back. "Yeah, that's him." Dwyer exhaled through his nose. "Miss Branson, I know what people are saying. I've seen the footage, but that doesn't change protocol. He's a wild horse. That means he falls under federal protection and regulation." Ella stepped forward, her voice firm. "And if he doesn't want to leave? If he's bonded to a foal that can't survive without him? That's not how wild animals work. You sure about that?" The air between them crackled like the dry wind over the ridge. Before Dwyer could reply, Riley let out a soft whinny from the pasture. Guardian turned immediately, trotted to the fence line where the colt waited, then stood beside him like a sentinel. Watching. Always watching. Dwyer took off his sunglasses, rubbed his eyes. "Look, I'm not heartless, but there are rules. We round up Mustangs that stray too close to humans. That's how we keep the balance." Ella gestured toward the open land behind her. "Balance? You're going to take a stallion from the one place he chose, freely, to protect a foal that isn't even his? I'm going to do my job," he said flatly. That afternoon, Ella called an emergency meeting in the main barn office. Miles showed up first, then Maya. Dwyer sat across from them, flipping through documents that looked clinical, lifeless. "He's not harming anything," Maya argued. "He's not raiding feed, not damaging fencing. He's demonstrating behavior we've never observed before in a wild Mustang." "This isn't about behavior," Dwyer replied. "It's about jurisdiction. You're housing a federally protected animal on private property." "And if we're not housing him?" Miles asked. "If he's free to come and go as he pleases?" Dwyer narrowed his eyes. "You're saying this is voluntary?" Miles shrugged. "Have you tried telling him to leave?" Dwyer didn't answer. Ella stood. "He's not hurting anyone, and if you take him, Riley will suffer. He's just a colt. He doesn't know anything else. Then the colt needs to learn how to live without him." "You tell him that," Ella said. "You go out there and pull them apart, see what happens." Dwyer didn't move. That night, the storm finally hit. Lightning cracked over the ridge, splitting the sky with raw electricity. Rain came down in violent sheets, and the wind screamed through the canyons like something alive. Ella had secured all the gates, stalls, and equipment before nightfall, but something felt off. Tucker paced the cabin, growling softly, then the power flickered. A moment later, her phone buzzed. "Maya, Riley's out. Gate came loose in the storm. Guardian's gone after him." Ella was out the door before the message finished loading. She jumped in the ATV, thunder rumbling overhead, headlights slicing through the pouring rain. As she raced across the sanctuary grounds, she spotted them. Two shadows against the storm, one smaller and staggering, the other circling like a guardian angel. Riley was in the north paddock, where floodwater pooled at the low end. The colt had panicked, his hooves slipping on wet earth, his cries barely audible over the wind. Guardian stood between him and the rising water, herding him away, blocking every direction but the safe one. Ella leapt from the ATV, boots sinking into mud. "Riley!" she shouted. "Easy, boy!" Guardian's head whipped around. For a second, Ella thought he might charge, but instead, he stepped back, allowing her to reach the colt, nudge him gently toward the gate. As Ella led Riley through, Guardian followed. Miles and Maya met them halfway up the path with blankets and halters. They got Riley secured, wrapped and warm. Then they turned to Guardian. He didn't bolt, he didn't run. He just stood there, drenched and still, his eyes locked on Riley as if to say, "I'll stay until he's safe." Maya filmed the entire thing. The next day it was everywhere, viral. The footage showed Guardian shielding Riley from the floodwater, moving between the colt and danger like a trained protector. Not a wild stallion, not a threat, a guardian. By the time Dwyer returned 2 days later, his demeanor had changed. He stepped out of the SUV slower, more thoughtful. Maya was in the barn, Riley at her side. Ella waited near the paddock where Guardian stood grazing quietly. Dwyer walked up and stopped beside her. "Heard the storm hit you hard," he said. "We made it through." He nodded. "I saw the footage." Ella, "No dio nada." After a long pause, Dwyer sighed. Maybe the wild has chosen differently this time." He turned and walked back to his vehicle. Didn't even bring out the paperwork. That evening, as the sky blushed purple and the last light faded from the ridge, Ella stood by the fence and watched Riley curl beside Guardian in the pasture. Some rules, she thought, were meant to be rewritten. 6 months later, Red Rock Valley looked different. Not because of the land. The buttes still caught fire at sunset. The wind still carried fine desert dust through the low brush, and the sanctuary still stretched across 1,500 stubborn acres. But something beneath the surface had changed. Something in the way people arrived, more quietly now, with reverence in their steps. Something in the way Guardian stood at the edge of the fence line each morning. His ears pricked not in fear, but in watchfulness. He had not returned to the wild. He had stayed. Ella leaned against the pasture gate one cool morning in early spring, a steaming mug in hand, her eyes fixed on the pair grazing near the ridge, a now thriving Riley, sleek, strong, all legs and curiosity, and Guardian, still proud, still lean, still deeply, undeniably wild. But not alone. Never again. After the storm and the viral footage, the Bureau had gone silent. Not officially, of course. There were still calls, still emails, still veiled concerns about precedent and wildlife policy. But no one had come to take Guardian away. Instead, interest turned into admiration. Then, slowly, into support. People donated. Scientists visited. A documentary crew from Oregon spent 2 weeks just filming Guardian and Riley's interactions. But Ella made one thing clear. This wasn't a zoo. This was a sanctuary. And Guardian would always be free to leave, if he chose. He never did. To honor that, Ella and Miles designed a new section of the property. An open range enclosure that mimicked the wild, but stayed within sanctuary boundaries. Rolling hills, a shallow stream, clusters of native trees. No barns, no fences visible from the inside, just space, just choice. And every evening, without fail, Guardian returned to the paddock where Riley spent the night. He never slept far from him. Riley, for his part, had grown into a remarkable colt, curious but calm, confident but never reckless. He responded to human cues, tolerated handling, even began halter training with surprising ease, as if he had already learned the hard lessons of caution and trust from someone far older than his young mind could remember. Maya called it second-hand wisdom. "He doesn't react like a normal domestic colt," she told Ella one afternoon as they watched Riley gently nudge a frightened rescue foal named Jasper. He reads body language the way wild horses do. He listens before he acts. That's Guardian's influence. Ella Asensio. He's teaching him everything he knows. And more, Maya added, because Riley's passing it on. Jasper, the foal Riley had just comforted, was one of 4 new arrivals at Silver Rock Sanctuary, all orphans, all nervous, all struggling to adjust. And somehow, Riley had become the bridge, the translator between 2 worlds. He approached them slowly, never forced touch, always offered presence first, the same way Guardian had offered it to him. And they responded. The sanctuary had become more than a place of refuge. It had become something radical, a model of healing, not from above, not from training manuals or forced submission, but from within the herd itself, from the family that chose each other. One cool April morning, as the sun crested over the ridge, Ella noticed Guardian standing beside Jasper. The young foal was trembling. A storm had passed the night before, loud and violent. Guardian didn't touch him, just stood close, let him lean in when he was ready. By dusk, Jasper was grazing peacefully beside Riley, and Guardian, he kept watch, as always. That evening, as golden light spilled across the paddocks, Ella stood beside Maya and Miles near the main barn. All 3 were quiet, just watching the unlikely herd before them. Riley leading Jasper and the others through a gentle walk, Guardian trailing behind at a protective distance. "They've built their own system," Maya said, her voice soft with awe. "They don't need us as much as we thought." Miles chuckled. "Speak for yourself. I still patch up knees and shovel more than my fair share of manure." But Ella said nothing for a while. She just watched them. Riley, the colt who should have died alone in the desert. Guardian, the stallion who refused to let that happen. And now, this unlikely herd, one bonded not by bloodlines or breeding, but by compassion, by choice. "Some fathers are born," Ella said finally, "and some are chosen." Maya smiled. "You think he'll ever leave?" "No," Ella said, "I don't." And she was right. Even as Riley grew stronger, faster, even as he no longer needed Guardian's guidance to survive, Guardian never left. His role evolved, from rescuer to protector, from protector to mentor, from mentor to something deeper, harder to define. He was simply family now. Later that summer, as tourists stood behind quiet viewing fences and scientists made notes from shaded platforms, Riley stood tall near the fence line, wind in his mane, eyes fixed on the horizon. Guardian came to stand beside him. Someone nearby whispered, "They look like mirror images." And they did, not in body, but in bearing, in heart. The sanctuary was thriving. The story of Guardian and Riley had led to policy changes, not sweeping reforms, but new conversations, about wild horses, about interspecies bonds, about what it means to recognize agency and emotion in animals we'd long treated as instinct machines. But for Ella, the most important change was smaller. It was the way Riley still leaned into Guardian's side when the night grew cold. It was the way Guardian stood guard even now, long after the threat had passed. It was the way every rescue foal that arrived learned, slowly, patiently, that they were safe here, that they belonged. And on the rare evenings when the desert wind fell still and the stars burned extra bright over Red Rock Valley, you could hear it, a low nicker, soft and steady, moving through the pasture like a lullaby. Guardian's voice, the voice of a wild stallion who had once walked 40 miles with a stranger's foal on his back and built a family with nothing more than love and will.